You're listening to the Packernet Podcast Network.
We all have smartphones, and we all know they're pretty amazing, but they also can be amazingly distracting, especially when we're around other people. So US Cellular wants us to reset our relationship with our phones by putting down our phones for $5. That's right, a company that sells phones wants us to put down our phones. And to see what we find, learn more at uscellular.com/built for us.
It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident fanalist, as always, Ryan Schlipp. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_daddy. So, a couple different things I'd like to talk about today. One of them, not a ton to say outside of I was kind of poking around at some of the data from last year. I was actually looking into the Chicago Bears, and I didn't have anything good to say. By that I mean anything negative to say toward the Bears, so that was a flop. However, I accidentally stumbled on something. First of all, the lesser of things, we know the defense struggled last year. They ranked 27th overall. One of the other things that is certainly a factor is they also got worse over time. Again, I doubt that would shock anybody, and it's not at a super rapid rate. There are a bunch of other teams. I think I was looking at growth versus decline, deceleration, whatever. The Packers ranked 11th worst in terms of getting worse over time. So again, nothing necessarily rapid, but in terms of like the decision to move on from Joe Barry, not that it needs to be revisited. I think we've covered all our bases, but it did get worse over time. I was looking at the DVOAs week over week, and I tried to look at a couple different things. Number one, just to be clear, what this kind of turned into, it started off as, Bears fans are claiming they ended real strong as far as defense. I wanted to look at that. Kind of hard to argue with it. But anyways, it kind of turned into more of a question, kind of expanding, I guess, on the Eagles thing in terms of why don't we try to focus on the right things? And I'm not saying this is 100% right. It might depend on a case-to-case basis. Some teams got worse because they lost certain players, etc. But still, I want to look at two things. One of them you could do is just look at the average over the last, let's say, 5 weeks, just to kind of get a better picture of who the team really materialized into, as opposed to, maybe getting off to an early start and then falling apart because everybody's kind of getting off to a slow start or whatever. I'm a little more interested in the late year type of thing. The other thing that's really interesting, though, is just looking at the slopes. In other words, just chart out the teams and how they do from DVOA. It's a line chart that bounces up and down, good days, bad days, whatever. And then you get a little trend line that kind of shows the averages going across. And then you calculate the slope of how high or low the angle is to show, which teams are the most rapidly growing or most rapidly decelerating. And so again, I found that about the Green Bay Packers defense, and I thought, okay, well, that'll be a decent thing to throw out there. It looks like it was a slope that was 2.1. So in other words, when you're talking DVOA, when you're talking defensive DVOA, positive is negative, positive is bad. So +2 is not the end of the world. I mean, the worst was Washington, which is a 12.9, basically. They started off with a really solid defense and ended up with a really trash defense. But still, it's there. I figured I'd mention it. Chicago, by the way, might as well just say it rather than just ignore it. They were second best as far as the slope is concerned. Now, part of that does have to do with them being a god-awful defense to begin with, but they did end quite strong. If you look at the averages over the last several weeks, it's not as flattering for them, but they still ranked 11th. So there you go. The other couple things I wanted to point out, though, the best of which we'll save for last, I wanted to look at Detroit a little bit because, obviously I've hammered the Eagles quite a bit. Now, I think like 2 different episodes I've kind of gone in and been like, I don't know what the heck you guys are talking about. You're kind of stupid. By the way, Philly was the 3rd worst as far as decreasing over time. It was Washington, then Seattle, then Philly, as far as defense is concerned. But I think we forget about Detroit, and if you remember, Detroit did get off to a quote-unquote hot start. I mean, again, the whole beating Kansas City thing was such a ridiculous fluke, but they did pull it off, whatever. But they did seem to slow down a little bit down the stretch. It's a little bit more subtle than Philadelphia. They certainly still had some good games, but if you kind of look at how they went about this here, even you can go back to Week 11 against Chicago. They beat Chicago 26-31. Chicago's terrible. They barely beat them. Green Bay goes into their house and beats them. They beat the Saints, who are not good. They lose to Chicago 28-13, which is abysmal. They beat Denver, who's terrible. They beat Minnesota, who's terrible. They lost to Dallas and then beat Minnesota, who's bad. Right? So, and yeah, they put a hurting on a couple teams. I mean, they beat Denver 42-17. But it's not, for a playoff team to only beat the bad teams and lose to all the good teams, it's not great, right? Then they beat the Rams. Again, I'm kind of iffy on the Rams. They did end really strong down the stretch, whatever, but they beat them by 1 point. Tampa was really not good. They only got to this point because they whooped on Philadelphia, who was a disaster. And then they went toe-to-toe with an actual good team, the 49ers, and lost. But if we just look at it, rather than kind of speculating like that, the Detroit Lions actually got worse over time on defense at a more rapid rate than Green Bay did. They were the 8th worst in terms of, I got to think of a word for it. Robot, help me. There we go. They experienced one of the steepest declines in the league and ranked 8th worst. Thank you. It says, this phrasing highlights the significant negative changes without awkward wording. Yeah, well, shove it, robot. So the 8th steepest decline in defense, in defensive performance. And offense really wasn't a ton better. It was still negative. The offense did decline over time. They were, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14th. So about middle of the league, but they did decline, and it was the 14th steepest decline. And then if we just look at the last 5 weeks overall, where did Detroit rank offensively and defensively? Detroit's defense ranked 17th, and their offense ranked 9th. This is not exactly a powerhouse team to be barely top 10 on offense, on an offense, by the way, that is declining, and to be 17th on defense on a defense that is declining. Now, here's the most important part. As we, let me play this real quick just to kind of put a little bit of a exclamation point on this. This video was sent to me courtesy of Monty. He's always keeping me up to date on some good stuff. He's at Spurs NXT.
I'll say it right now. 2024 predictions. The Green Bay Packers come in last place in their division.
What are you talking about?
I want to say it again.
That's nonsense.
I want to say it again.
It's all nonsense.
The Green Bay Packers will come in last place.
In their division?
In their division. Okay?
That's the Viking spot.
Okay?
That's the Viking spot.
Okay. I'm going to write it down, put a little envelope, give it to the producers. There's 19 of them. Little time capsule. You can hang on to it, and we'll bring it out next January. I'll say.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll keep it out for you. This guy's obviously a clown. I don't even think Vikings fans would agree with this. I don't think Bears fans would agree with this, or Lions fans for that matter. It's a stupid take. If you want to say the Lions are the best in the division, okay, fine. If you want to get super crazy and think, I think the Bears with that defense and this new quarterback are actually going to be number 1 or 2 in the division ahead of the Packers. Getting a little crazy, but okay, fine. You want to say the Packers are worse than the Lions and the Bears and the Vikings, you're just trying to be stupid. Now, I don't know if this is him just forgetting about the Vikings or not really looking into it or just believing that J.J. McCarthy, first of all, is even going to play, and beyond that is going to play really well. I don't know. But let me take a crack at this real quick. If we look at the offensive DVOAs for all 32 NFL teams, if you look at the last 5 weeks, the Green Bay Packers were the third best offense behind San Francisco and Baltimore, and just barely behind Baltimore. It was 26% compared to 25%. San Francisco is the only one that was heads and tails above everybody at 35%. So at the end of the season, the Packers were it's not even debatable. They were better than everybody else in the division. Again, Detroit being 9, Minnesota is 28th. Where's Chicago at? Chicago was 14th. But that's not even the biggest thing. The team that experienced the most growth, the team with the steepest incline, the most significant improvement, is the Green Bay Packers. The Packers' offense improved more than any other team last year. Their slope was 12.28, just ahead of New Orleans at 12.2. Las Vegas was 10. Then the Giants, Las Vegas was 8. I don't know, something like that. Detroit was 19th and was a negative 1.3, meaning they got worse over time. The Detroit Lions were better early in the season than by the time the season ended. The offense and the defense got worse. So let me take a crack at this. The Green Bay Packers had one of the worst defenses in football and had one of the best offenses that was the most rapidly accelerating offense in all of football. That team, which continues to ascend, will be taking the field with a new defense, with new defensive pieces, new defensive scheme, new defensive coaches across the board. What happens? Let's start here. If the Packers defense is still 27th, I don't know that it isn't still the best team in the NFC North. It was last year. They were better than the Bears, they were better than the Vikings, they were better than the Lions. That was with the 27th ranked defense and getting worse every single day. What happens if this is a top 20 defense? What happens if it's a top 16 defense? What happens if it's a top 10 defense? It's not even close. And what are the offenses that are competing with the Packers right now in the NFC North? Let me give you a super crazy take as your resident Bears hater. Chicago, in terms of their offensive growth, was the 5th highest. Green Bay, New Orleans, Las Vegas, New York, and then Chicago. Chicago was the 5th most rapid, growing, ascending, improving offense. They had one of the most rapidly growing and ascending defenses. So how about this for a hot take? Green Bay isn't battling Detroit. They're battling Chicago for the NFC North. Now, maybe that's a little stupid because if you just look at how they actually ended, Chicago did get rapidly better, but they went from a laughingstock to kind of, a little bit bad. middle of the pack. Detroit still was better. But look at the last 5 weeks. Chicago was 14th, Detroit was 9th. That's only 5 spots. And that's with a joke of a quarterback. Chicago was not that much worse than Detroit offensively. They were significantly better on defense than Detroit last year. Another year with this defensive coordinator, some additional pieces, more wide receivers, more than anybody needs, but they have more wide receivers. If Caleb Williams is decent, I'm not sure this isn't the number 2 team. How about that for a hot take? Anyways, why don't we take our first break? We'll come back, and I want to take a look at some of the free agents that are still floating around out there. I know it's not my favorite thing in the world to talk about, but we haven't talked about it. There's people out there, so we're going to do that. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. We all have smartphones, and we all know they're pretty amazing, but they also can be amazingly distracting, especially when we're around other people. So US Cellular wants us to reset our relationship with our phones by putting down our phones for $5. That's right, a company that sells phones wants us to put down our phones. And to see what we find, learn more at uscellular.com/built-for-us.
Jewelry isn't a gift you give just once. It's a way to remind your loved one of a beautiful moment every time they see it. Blue Nile can help you find the gift that says how you feel and says it beautifully, with expert guidance and a wide assortment of jewelry of the highest quality at the best price. Go to BlueNile.com and experience the convenience of shopping Blue Nile, the original online jeweler since 1999. That's BlueNile.com to find the perfect jewelry gift for any occasion. BlueNile.com.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This episode is supported by FX's Clipped, the scandalous story of the 2014 Clippers owner's racist remarks captured on tape and heard around the world. The series charts the tape's impact on a dysfunctional basketball organization striving to win against their reputation as the most cursed team in the league. Starring Lawrence Fishburne, Jackie Weaver, Cleopatra Coleman, and Ed O'Neill. FX's Clipped, streaming June 4th, only on Hulu.
All right, so let's go through some of the available free agents. I think there's a couple things to note here. Why, this isn't free agent time. Why are we talking about free agents? Because this is kind of phase 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know what the phase is. But the question essentially comes down to, so the Packers get these guys in, they take a look at what they've got, and then they make a decision. Do we think we can win with the guys that we have? Do we need something to be able to compete? And then can we afford them? Can we get them at a reasonable, affordable price that would be worth it? It's a lot of boxes to check in order for this to be a thing. And I don't know exactly how much money the Packers are going to have to work with. According to SpotTrack, the Green Bay Packers sit at about $19 million in cap space, which is a good chunk. However, got to remember that Jordan Love is probably going to be getting a new contract pretty soon. And although usually you save money when you give somebody a new contract, I don't think that's going to be the case with Jordan Love. And I think there's maybe a good part of the reason why the Packers are sitting at this phase with $19 million. I can't remember the last time the Packers had $19 million this late in the season. So that's my expectation, is that a lot of that money's tied up for that. But let's just look at it anyways. Let's just assume that we do have a pile of money and we can make an offer. The other issue that people would probably bring up is, well, the Packers don't like to do this. They don't, we're in a building phase. We don't want to bring in these old guys. Here's what I would say in regard to that. I don't want to lock up a guy for 4 years. But if there's people floating around and we can get him on a 1-year deal, for example, to maybe, put a patch somewhere just in case, then the question kind of becomes, where might the Packers need some patches? I'm not talking about, let's just go get a guy because he's a big name guy. I'm talking about, okay, we'd like to just take the team we have, but where might we need some help, right? Wide receiver is not one of those places. Quarterback, not one of those places. Tight end, no. Running back, no. Tackle, no. Interior offensive line, yes. That isn't to say we definitely don't, but it's a place where it's possible the Packers are going to look at it and go, I'd rather get some help here. So why don't we start there? Let's take a look at some of the interior offensive lineman candidates that are still floating around out there. Starting from the top being guys that had been paid the most previously. Connor Williams is still out there. That's a big name guy that's done a lot of good on the offensive line. However, big part of the reason he's still a free agent is he suffered a pretty terrible knee injury this past year. He still has not gotten a job up to this point, and he's 27 years old. The expectation was prior to his injury, he was about to get a massive multi-year deal. I don't see how this fits into the Packers' current situation. Maybe under a different situation where you're looking more long-term, this is a guy you invest in, and then down the line, he can kind of get back to health and give you 2, 3, 4 good years. I don't know. But as far as we'll fix it, we just haven't done it today. Maybe next draft or whatever, we'll get somebody, next free agency, whatever. But we need a guy this year that can play and get us where we got to be. I don't know that Connor is the best option. After that, there's a lot of recognizable names. You got Mark Lewinsky, Nick Gates, Mason Cole, Phil Haynes, Halapulavati Vaitai, Dalton Reisner, Matt Feeler, Scott Quessenberry, Connor McGovern, etc., etc. None of these guys are fantastic options. I honestly think at best we're bringing in guys that set a floor. So if Sean Ryan is a disaster, you got somebody that's kind of like below average. But there's lots of options. Plenty of guys that if you want, like a 65 pass blocking, 55 run blocking type of guy, sure, you got them. So I think there's options, and I think there's relatively cheap options. I mean, if you look at, first of all, again, a lot of injuries. Vaitai also, a guy that has done some stuff in the past, but didn't play very much last year due to injury, so you probably get him at a discount. Plus, he's 31 years old. Mark Lewinsky, 32 years old. Matt Feeler, 32 years old. Connor McGovern, 31. Greg Van Roten, 34. Down the line it goes. So, I mean, if you can get these guys for, I don't know, $1.5 million, maybe that's a little under for some of them. Maybe a guy like Vaitai wants $2 million just based on what he's done. But again, massive injuries, 31 years old. I don't know. But again, are there any lifesavers? No. Are there some possible, let's get some competition in here type guys? I think there's plenty. So what else? Because there's nothing else on the offense, really. On the defensive side, I would say no to safety. We don't need to really go down that road. I think we're pretty well set at defensive tackle. I did think a little bit about edge, and I do think it's maybe not the worst thing to possibly consider from a depth standpoint. We have Preston, we have Rashawn, we have Lucas Van Ness. Maybe we have some guys after that. I'm not entirely sure. The problem I have is edge is expensive. So, for example, if you wanted to look at a guy like Carl Lawson, who was a defensive end for the New York Jets, there's a lot to like about that situation. But his previous annual average per year salary was $15 million. We cannot afford that. I think the same could be said for corner. Obviously there's big name guys like Xavier Howard out there, and you throw that name out and you think, oh man, if Xavier Howard could be this and that and da-da-da-da, with Jair, et cetera, it's going to be so good. $18 million. Now, he's probably not worth that anymore at 31 years old, but still, J.C. Jackson's another name, 16.5. Adoree Jackson, 13. I mean, even Patrick Peterson, who I don't think I'd be interested in, is 7. That's too much money. So I think there are depth options for edge if need be. Like if you're real hard up and just don't have the bodies, you can do it. Interior offensive line makes the most sense, but there's not a lot of really talented players. Corner is too expensive. And it kind of just leaves linebacker, which, again, I just can't imagine spending a ton of... And it's cheap if you just want to try to take a swing at somebody. I mean, the most expensive linebacker as far as what they were getting paid last year was Tyus Bowser, and it was $5.5 million. But do you want to pay $5.5 million? Which is maybe more than you can even afford to spend on a guy that's just not very good at football. So, I mean, you can play around with the names and the numbers depending on what you think we're doing with Jordan and whatnot, but I just, it's pretty much how it always goes. I don't see a ton of fits where I look at it and go, I'd be good with that. I really don't. I mean, like I said, offensive line, it's mostly just going to be a shrug and he's bad too, but maybe he'll be better than the version of bad that we have. Linebacker, I don't like them. Edge, anyone that I think is worth it is too expensive. Same with corner. Again, maybe you can get a guy for $5 million that's like a rotational guy off edge. That's about it. Safety, I don't want it. So there's a lot of bodies. There's a lot of big names. Packers do technically right now have a lot of money. So, if they wanted to take a big swing, presumably if you think we're keeping all that, in other words, not saving it for a big expenditure coming up, then maybe there is a big swing the Packers could take. But as of right now, kind of as I've always said, that they're where they are for a reason. 32 teams and not one of them's come up with a contract offer. I tell you what, things are not taking as long as I thought. Rather than bothering to even take a break and come back for the last little thing, let me give you my last little note here. We'll call it a short day, I guess. I'm surprised. I feel like I've been talking for 40 minutes. It's been 20. So via Easton Butler on the old Twitters. And we talked about this before in terms of what Christian Watson meant when he said what he said. If you don't know or didn't hear that, essentially he said he was, I don't remember the exact terminology, but the bottom line is he's not properly aligned. He's not even. He's whatever. But the bottom line is that the strength and flexibility between his different legs are different. So his right and left leg have different strengths and flexibilities and whatnot. And so it can cause strain on one side of the body more so than the other. So there's a little bit of an update on that. He says Christian Watson went down to UW-Madison this offseason with Eric Stokes to find the cause of their hamstring issues. With Watson finding out there's a difference in his muscle mass in his legs, with his right leg being 20% less than his left, which seems quite significant. Since he found out, he's dropped the difference to 8 to 10% and has seemed more explosive during practices. Watson is trying to drop the difference to only 6%. So, I don't know, man. I'm trying not to get too optimistic about it, but I do like it when, well, let me put it this way. I don't like when we keep hearing about, oh yeah, I'm feeling better, I'm feeling stronger, this, that. Very rarely does that materialize into anything positive. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. I can't remember a single time when somebody made a claim about like, yeah, well, I was hurt last year. And then you go, oh, they were hurt last year? Dang. And now they're not. They're going to be so much better. I can't think of a single time somebody said that and they came back and they were actually better. So everybody's optimistic, and it just, nothing ever changes. Usually it has to do with how good of a football player you are and not so much recurring injuries. But this is also the first time I've ever heard something this specific in terms of like, no, we actually found out something. I'm not going to say we found out exactly why these things were happening, but we found out something that 20%, less muscle in his right leg than his left is a significant difference that can and probably will, when you're talking about that level of explosiveness and whatnot, cause problems with things like, hamstrings. And while there's still potentially some other things that can happen, being able to identify something like that and getting that number down is, it just has me feeling quite a bit more optimistic, and I'm hoping that he can keep beefing up that left leg or the right leg a little bit. But I'm feeling good about it. I'm standing on him being a truly elite playmaker for the Green Bay Packers at some point, and I hope that comes to be, because I know he can be. But I'm just hoping we can see it. Anyways, again, I guess we'll just call it a short one. I'm going to get out of here. You guys have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye.